And joining us with perspective on Mr. Trump's vice presidential pick is Josh Blank with the Texas Politics Project. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay, so there's a lot of talk of unity right now, from the president to the former president, everybody in between talking about unity. When we think of J.D. Vance, he's considered in circles to be another MAGA Republican. With fiery language in his speeches and things of that nature. Is he the man that that would be the one to kind of facilitate this unity with the former president?
I don't really think so. I mean, ultimately, the decision to put Vance on the ticket, by all accounts, was made many, many days ago. And if anything, the assassination attempt didn't really influence this pick. Sort of the morning after analysis of this is that Vance really is a doubling down on Trumpism, whereas oftentimes a vice presidential candidate is picked to balance the ticket out or provide certain regional appeal. With Senator Vance, that's not really what's going on here, and what you're really seeing is one of Trump's strongest defenders, one of his best TV personalities being elevated to really double down on the MAGA message.
We know Vance does not have a lot of experience in politics, less than 2 years in Congress. But we've heard, Donald Trump Jr. saying that that is actually a good thing, his lack of experience in Washington. So what do you think? Do you think that will help or hurt him?
Well, I think ultimately a big part of the Trump appeal is this idea of outsiderness, ultimately contrasting themselves with President Biden, who's really made his career being inside the government. Now, ultimately, there is some exposure to this. I mean, one of the criticisms of the Democratic ticket is that with former Senator Harris, Vice President Harris now on the Democratic ticket, you have a vice president really, very close to the presidency who may not be up to snuff or may not have the experience. That argument becomes a little bit tougher with such a new political candidate in J.D. Vance.
So we've touched on some of these things already, but just in general, what are the advantages to having J.D. Vance on the ticket? What are the disadvantages to having him on the ticket?
Sure. I mean, I think the disadvantage you guys already sort of pointed out in some ways, which is it's not a pick that necessarily expands Trump's appeal beyond where it is, but the hope is that it might make some inroads. I think the idea with Senator Vance is that you have a younger candidate, it's a millennial candidate who is going to appeal or try to appeal to younger voters. In particular, he's seen as someone who is a connection to sort of the tech entrepreneur space, where there's been a lot of questions right now about where they're going to put their money in this campaign, and he's seen as a great conduit to that group. And so in that sense, I don't see him as necessarily, again, expanding Trump's appeal necessarily with the electorate, but he does with some key groups that I think are just beyond Trump's reach at the moment.
I want to turn to the assassination attempt and kind of the fallout from the events of Saturday. How do you see that event impacting this election, and maybe in the immediate days, how do you see it impacting voters and their opinions of this race?
Sure. I may have a slightly unpopular view here. I don't see the impact to be that strong overall in the let's say in the long term. And the reason is that most voters in this election know how they feel about the candidates. And even though this was a horrible event and a stain on really American history, it's unlikely to make a Biden supporter become a Trump supporter, right? It's also very unlikely that this has necessarily changed the preferences of most Trump supporters, right? But in the coming days, we should expect to see a lot of sympathy for the former president. We should see a polling bounce, if not just in his favorability numbers, maybe in some of the trial ballots that we see, simply out of, again, a certain amount of sympathy for what was a horrific event.
Certainly. So time will just tell if that extends or not. And people have short memories, when it comes to things like that. Especially when we were talking about the whole unity concept. I think it feels like after the interview that President Biden gave just last night with Lester Holt here on NBC, that possibly those good feelings of unity and such between all party lines may be passing right now. The honeymoon might be over.
Yeah, look, I think it's very clear that we can all say that regardless of party label, nobody thinks political violence is a good thing. At the same time, for Democrats right now who are withholding their own criticisms at this very touchy moment in time, they're also looking at former President Trump and saying, it's your rhetoric that has turned the temperature up so much, and yet now, we have to stay silent. And so I think that sort of stasis can only last for so long.
Sure. All right. Josh Blank with the Texas Politics Project. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time today.